I've been a digital or a physical nomad for the last 4 years, and after living in more than 15 countries, I've learned that being a digital nomad is nothing like what you see on Instagram or out there. And yes, sometimes I work from beautiful beaches or places or cafes in exotic locations, but that's maybe 10% of reality. And the truth is that this lifestyle has been one of the most transformative experiences of my life, both beautiful and challenging at the same time. And it challenged me in the ways that I didn't expect when I left my corporate job at Bloomberg in London. So today I want to share everything that I wish somebody had told me before I started, from the psychological toll of constant movement to building real communities, from managing finances across borders to maintaining a relationship while traveling, and especially the dark side of the nomadic life that nobody talks about. And this isn't going to be another quit your job and live your dream video. Instead, I'll give you the raw, unfiltered, truthful view of how it is to live as a nomad without a fixed home for years at a time. So I'll break down the costs and the practical challenges, how to build genuine connections while constantly moving, what it's like to do it with a partner or without a partner, the impact on your well-being and your spiritual journey, if that's important to you, and most importantly, how to know if this lifestyle is actually right for you. So whether you're considering becoming a digital nomad or any kind of nomad, or just curious about this way of living and you're kind of feeling this curiosity, there's something more out there than the way that I'm living right now, the goal is to give you the complete picture. Of course, it's through my own eyes, it's through my own subjective experience. So it will be different for everyone, for you. But this way you'll get the idea about the freedom that you can gain, but also the sacrifices you might need to make in order to make it happen. So for those who don't know me, my name is Nick Huno, and I have been nomadic for the last 4 years, and I really want to give the kind of the context here, or how did I even become nomadic. So I used to work in a corporation. I worked for Bloomberg in London. It's a big financial technology, financial media company, and I ended up there in 2015, and then I left 2020 and started traveling. So I was in my job, and it was an office job, and I would go and I had to wear a suit. I had to be in the office at 8 a.m. and I was making really good money, but at first maybe there was that kick kind of like, I'm making big money, I'm in this prestigious job, and I'm in London and whatever. But then kind of after a year or two, it started to fade, and I was kind of realizing like I'm not actually really enjoying what I'm doing here. And the bigger questions started to come to the surface, like, what am I even doing here? Like, what am I here to do? What is my life about? And I remember that 1 year into the job, I had my first trip outside of Europe. And I went to California to visit one of my best friends. And I remember it was 2 weeks, so 3, maybe 2.5. And I had just such a sense of freedom. We rented a surfboard, a car, and we did that road trip along Highway 1 from San Francisco to San Diego and back. And I remember just a sense of freedom of waking up anytime that I wanted. I could go and surf in the ocean, then just, eat outside, be with my friends. And I remember feeling like, wow, this is the life that I actually want to live. This feels really good. Not my life in London where it's cold, it's rainy, it's miserable. I'm in just this, big steel building, sitting behind 2 screens, talking about stuff that I don't care about, and it's all just for the money. And that really planted the seed. I mean, I always enjoyed traveling as a kid also, and exploring. It's always been a part of who I am. And I even grew up nomadically, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But I remember kind of planting the seed of, when I quit my job, eventually, I will go and travel the world. And I was saving. I wasn't spending a lot of money. I was saving a lot from my salary. And the idea was always that I'm going to use these savings to explore the world, to travel, to go to places that I've always wanted to go to. And while at the same time figure out my life. What is it that I really want to do? And so that really kept me going for a while. But eventually I started to burn out. I had my existential crisis. My grandmother passed away. I had a painful breakup. And I began to really kind of feel this deep sense of void, which led me onto my inner path, or kind of the path of inner work and the spiritual path. And while still working, I went to Sri Lanka for a little bit, and to India. And I was meeting all these spiritual seekers, all these people that were kind of looking for something more in this life. And I remember saying, they asked me how long I was traveling for. I'm like, oh, I'm just here for a week or two. I'm just a break from my job. And what about you? And they would say, oh yeah, I've been on the road for 5 years or 10 years. And it just seemed like such a crazy idea. Like, how is that even possible? And yet that also felt really alluring to me. And I knew that I wanted to experience it firsthand. So for kind of cultural context, I grew up in different countries. I have Russian parents. I was born in Sweden and grew up in Finland, in Russia, and we moved to Belgium when I was a teenager, where I would say I grew up, the most part of my life. And then I moved to London in my 20s to work. And so I never really had a quote unquote home. There's not like one single place I grew up in, and there's maybe places I would come back to, but my life has already been kind of developing in this transition. And of course it brought about a lot of gifts in terms of I can understand so many different cultures, I speak many languages, and at the same time, it's a struggle sometimes, because I feel like I belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time. In Belgium, I don't feel Belgian. In Russia, I don't feel Russian. In Sweden, I don't feel Swedish. In the UK, I don't feel British. And so who am I, right? And I just feel like maybe the most European, but just like an international kid. And I know that people come to this journey through different ways. For some people, it's they grew up in one place and that's all they've ever seen. So they really want to get out there into the world and see it. And sometimes even kind of escape their environment, to see what else is out there. So we all come from different contexts, but I just kind of want to share where I'm coming from, if it helps for you to relate or not relate, or to understand, what's my background here. And so my initial expectations were, because I had a few friends, again, while I was still working at Bloomberg. I felt that, it was going to be fun. Like, I'm going to be in a lot of different places, and I get to decide where I go. And what I guess appealed to me most is just that sense of freedom. The freedom to be in a sunny country, the freedom to be in a place where I want to be, the freedom to be around people that I want to be with. And at the time, I still kind of didn't really know what I would be doing to make a living, because I didn't just want to save up, go travel, and come back to the old job or something similar. That was not really the plan. The plan was to, quit the job, have enough savings, go travel, and while traveling, figure something out, and ideally build my own business, which can then sustain me to continue traveling or settle somewhere else, whatever it may be, and whatever will come after that. And, it sort of, the way that it came about was, COVID happened, and in the job that I was, we obviously started to work remotely, and that was already helpful because I didn't have to commute to the office. And at the time, I was still living in London, and I was with a partner at the time, and we were living together. And then, slowly as COVID kind of began to fade, I was going to the office time to time. And what I was really waiting for, and again, maybe this won't resonate with everyone, but for me, I stuck with the job because I was depending on the visa. I was in the UK, and I was hoping to kind of get to the British passport so that I can maybe eventually settle there, which now in retrospect I know that I don't want to. But I kind of stuck around just right until the point that I got my permanent residency. And as soon as I got that, I quit. And I had savings, and I had roughly, I mean, roughly like calculated, kind of a rough, if I, and you can do your calculations, but I kind of estimated if I was to spend about 2,000 dollars, euros, I mean, they were quite similar, but let's say euros a month on traveling, right, on average, then I would have around 3 years that I could go for without traveling, right? If that's the average, and then still maybe even have a little bit more to kind of find the next job or whatever I need. So I had a runway of 3 years basically to just travel and do nothing and not have to worry about money. Of course, I would then kind of see my savings disappear. So my plan was never to kind of completely just spend it all. But at least that gave me that space in terms of, okay, I can at least take a few months, maybe even a year, to just even figure out what is it that I want to do. So it all kind of came really quickly, the way that I became nomadic. So COVID was kind of happening. I quit my job, and around the same time, my partner and I, we decided to split. Her visa was running out. She was coming back to Australia. We decided not to do long distance. And we were leaving our apartment in London. So, and instead of kind of going for a next apartment, I just felt I don't want to be in London during COVID, in this winter without a job. Like, what am I going to do here? And, the cost of living is obviously high and expensive. So I put all my things in self-storage, and I just researched all the different destinations to start with. And mind you, again, it was COVID time, so travel was a bit more complicated. And at first I picked Bali, and I even got a business visa to Bali because at the time they were only letting business visa holders. They weren't issuing any tourist visas. So I paid about $200 or $300, and I got the visa, it was approved. And then literally a week later, Bali shut down its borders completely to all visitors, no matter if on business visa or other visas, just open to residents and citizens or something like that. So that plan just completely failed. And my second kind of my plan B was Costa Rica, and I kept hearing about it from different friends, from different people. And the beautiful thing about Costa Rica at that time was that it was quite open. It didn't actually have very strict COVID regulation, and there were a few other countries that had a similar situation, like Mexico, for instance, or at least parts of it. And so I decided to buy the ticket and go to Costa Rica. There are a lot of flights here, so I'm going to be waving them off time to time. So I bought my ticket to Costa Rica, and I just went there. It was January 2021, so almost exactly 4 years ago from now. And this is how my nomadic journey began. My stuff was in self-storage in London. I quit my job, ended my relationship, and I was on the road, and I had no plans. I didn't have a job lined up. I didn't have any kind of alternative income lined up. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go. The only constraint that I kind of had at the time is I had to go back to the UK for a few more months so that I can eventually apply for the citizenship, but then I could go again. So I basically was just out in the open. So I won't kind of share all the details of all those 4 years, and instead I really want to give you the summary. But eventually my travel just kind of went from Costa Rica back to Europe for a little bit, nomading through Europe, then again to Latin America, this time Peru, Costa Rica, Mexico, then back to Europe, then nomading through the Canary Islands, and then eventually again back to Europe, nomading through a few places, and then to Asia, and now back to Europe, where I've been since January this year. And so, and I had some trips in Asia before that also, so I visited it a couple of times, but that was more when I was working in a corporate job. So some of the most difficult parts of being nomadic is you really learn to surrender, because sometimes you just really cannot control what happens. You know, like booking a place and it gets canceled, or your flight, or there's a delay, or you get a visa rejection, or, you know, whatever it is. And you kind of just, all you can do is surrender, right? And of course, you learn to adapt really quickly. And this comes with experience. Practically, you kind of know what to do, but also mentally, also emotionally, you kind of learn to deal with change and with quick change. But the beautiful side of this is you're pretty much flowing all the time, because you're on the move. You are changing locations. You are getting inspired by your environment. You're not getting stuck in the old ways. Like if you're just living in a place for years and years, it's beautiful. You can build a routine, but you can get kind of stuck in your mental ways because you're surrounded by the same environment. But as soon as you get yourself into a different situation, you're thinking differently. New feelings come up, or there's some reflections, there's some ideas. Creatively, it's really powerful. So again, to everything, there's kind of the light side and the shadow side. And one of the big kind of aspects of it is, of course, dealing with uncertainty. And the uncertainty of where am I going to sleep next month or next week or tomorrow. Financial uncertainty, right? It took me time to kind of build out my business and have income. So it was like, where is money going to come from? You know, the anxiety of spending. We're suddenly looking at places around and they're all, you know, expensive to stay because it's high season. All these things felt, you know, like they were bringing up anxiety and bringing up fear. And this, in many ways, it's an opportunity to heal a lot of those things. It's an opportunity to really go deeper inside and kind of see, okay, well, where's this fear really coming from? Like, am I really going to be without anything? And again, kind of everything somehow worked out. There were always people that would help out, or somehow, you know, I would always make some more money along the way, or I would find the next spot to stay in. And again, it taught me to surrender to life and trust that it's going to work out. So there are many growth opportunities, but also challenges with this. And what kept me grounded is my spiritual practice, or just, you know, my practice, whether it's movement and looking after my body, going for a run, finding the local gym or yoga classes. And I mean, now I'm going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu here. I was doing capoeira in other places. Hiking, obviously, but also all the practices, you know, kind of for my inner world, right? Like meditation, journaling, any kind of emotional regulation. That really kept me grounded, because no matter where I was physically, I could always come back to the same place inside. And that same place is a place of peace, of calm, spaciousness. And this is what really helped me in some of the most difficult times. And, you know, but really the kind of the challenges nobody talks about is, one of the main ones being a nomad is probably being lonely, because you travel and sometimes you're in places where you're completely alone, or you're with people but maybe they're locals and you don't speak the language. There's just not many Westerners, or, you know, people that speak English, or even when you meet people and then you go to the next place, suddenly like you're making new friends again and again and again, and that can get tiring after a while. And there are some solutions to that, or there are some ways of making this better, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But that's probably really one of the most difficult ones. And of course, there's also that kind of, well, you learn to be, you know, find the home within yourself, no matter where you are. Eventually, I feel the body or our system, it craves a bit more stability. You know, it takes a while for the body to get used to, especially when you're changing continents, to get used to the new water, new food, right? It's all different bacteria in there, especially if you go to more exotic places. This is a different climate. So, you know, we kind of think it takes only a couple of days to readjust, but really it takes weeks, if not months, to really land in a new place. And actually, even sometimes generations, right? We all have different kind of relationships to the land that we grew up on, or our ancestors grew up on. That's why, you know, for certain people in Asia, certain foods that we might have in Europe might not land as well, and vice versa. And it might take generations before the body really adapts. So there's really, that craving to just be in one place at times. And again, there's ways of kind of mitigating that, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. So let's talk about the practical reality of being a nomad. Being a nomad, sometimes people think it's expensive, sometimes people think it's cheap. In reality, being a nomad can be whatever you want it to be. And the biggest expense is probably flying, right? If you want to go to the cheapest destination, I mean, again, depends where you're from, but if you're kind of in the West, then you would need to go to, let's say, Latin America or Asia or even Africa, and so the biggest cost would, of course, be transportation. But once you're there, usually the costs will not be that high. Now, you might be limited by visas. Visas might also cost something. Sometimes they're free, sometimes they're cheap. But usually there's a time limit, right? You can only stay for 30 days, 90 days, or you can apply for longer term visas. So this is something important to research every time you go. Some countries, depends on your passport also, that's why your kind of context matters. But countries will have different policies in terms of visas. But generally, if you go there, a lot of countries you can eventually figure out how to get a long-term visa, like a business visa or something along those lines, or a student visa, you're learning the language, whatever it is. So it can be as cheap and as expensive as you want it to be. Everything is, on average, getting more expensive, of course, right? This is just the matter of inflation throughout the world, and also the kind of more popular, cheap tourist places like Thailand, for instance, are getting more expensive compared to what they used to be 10 or 20 years ago. Same with Bali, same with parts of India and many other places. But there's still a lot of places that are relatively affordable, because the West is also getting more expensive, right? So it's still, of course, relatively cheap. Now, I won't kind of go into a detailed breakdown of the costs. Again, I haven't been to Africa, for instance, and there are wonderful places to also go there. So I can only speak for pretty much Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Now, you will find probably the cheapest places to kind of stay in Asia. Thailand, kind of Philippines, Bali, that begins to be more in the mid and kind of higher range. But you can live a cheaper lifestyle if you go to somewhere like Cambodia or Laos or parts of India or even Bangladesh or parts of Nepal. So there are many, many different places you can choose to. And generally the idea is the less touristy it is, the cheaper it's going to be. But the downside is less infrastructure for you maybe if you're working online, a little bit harder to communicate, if there's a language barrier, less other travelers to meet. You can connect with locals, but if you're craving to connect with other travelers, that might be missing. So that's usually the downside. But there's still places where there's a lot of travelers and they're still relatively affordable. So, again, depends, and you can do your research. Latin America also depends where you go, but I would say on average is a little bit more expensive than Asia. Again, depends. But yeah, it's the same as in Asia. You can kind of find your place there. Costa Rica is probably the most expensive place in Central and Latin America. It's considered to be the safest. I mean, I don't know if El Salvador is now kind of on a similar same level, and it has a decent infrastructure, and there are a lot of expats, but it's definitely quite expensive. I remember being in Costa Rica and just living there, and I mean paying $100+ per night for decent accommodation, but nothing amazing. And then food was sometimes costing quite similarly to London. And I was maybe in more touristy places. Again, if you go more kind of away from them, it can be 30, 40, 50% cheaper. But it's an expensive country, and I think it only got more expensive now. So Mexico is cheaper, also different places there. Nicaragua will be cheaper, Guatemala will be cheaper, and obviously there are many, many other places. So that really depends. And it depends on if you really don't have much, then of course, kind of you can try to go to the cheaper place and live a cheaper lifestyle. But generally try to find the balance. It's not necessarily always about going to the cheapest place. You kind of also want to figure out, where do you want to be? Who do you want to be surrounded with? What kind of culture do you want to be in? and based on that, make that decision. And you can always try out. And if you don't like it, you can always leave. Right? So, do your research, follow your intuition, and you'll find the places that resonate for you. In terms of the kind of accommodation, I won't go too much into it because this is not kind of the practical stuff video, but generally I would stay in Airbnb most of the time, sometimes hotels, sometimes maybe retreats, communities, or I would write to places directly. Sometimes it was something through friends or people I would meet, but generally my go-to was Airbnb. There are different tricks with Airbnb. Sometimes you might find the name of the Airbnb, and then if you Google it, you'll find their website and you can write to them directly, right? So you don't have to pay the Airbnb fee. Often I would take it off the Airbnb platform, and this was quite effective. Not many people know, but actually when you're about to book a place, you can scroll down and you have a message button. So instead of booking, you can message them, and you can communicate, and you can kind of hint of if they're open to taking off platform. Again, there are risks, right? Like, you could be scammed and stuff. For me, it was always fine. I followed my gut and everything's been okay. And you can always negotiate. That's what I would do quite often. I would say, hey, I really love your place, but it's slightly out of my budget. What's your best price? And sometimes they would offer something, sometimes not, and I would still take it. But generally, you can get at least 10, maybe sometimes 20, 30% off if you message them, especially if it's a longer stay, right? So, and this is another accommodation, might as well mention it now. Depends on your window. If you're going nomadic for just a couple of months, or if you're going nomadic indefinitely, try to stay in places for as long as possible. Because, before, when I was working in the corporation, for me, staying somewhere for 2 weeks was, wow, that's a massive trip. Now it's like, it's at least 2 weeks in one place. And I feel to really land, you need maybe at least 3 or 4 weeks. So if you can make a month your minimum, you will have a great time nomading. And there's even a term for that called slow-madding. And I mean, slow-madding can be even slower than that, where you stay in places for months or for years. Where did you draw the line at the end of the day? But, this way you can really explore the place. You can really meet people. You can really connect with the land. You can really even build a kind of mini routine before you move to the next place. And this is what I'm doing at this point. Like, we're staying in places for a few months. And, there are limitations, again, in terms of visa, in terms of taxes, and I'll touch on that. But you really want to prioritize being in a place for as long as possible. If you're going to a country, and let's say you have 3 weeks, rather than splitting those 3 weeks in 3 places, at least me at this point, I would choose to just spend it in one place. And it's okay, I might miss them. Or you can kind of combine it more in the sense of, I'd rather be really settled in one place and maybe do very short trips in the other places. So I'll go through periods of, I'll be in a place for a couple of months, then maybe there'll be a couple of weeks of quick visiting, and then again I'll land somewhere for a couple of months or more. Because if you're constantly on that move, moving every week, you have to pack your bag, you have to think where you're going, booking a taxi, booking a flight, booking a train, getting food, stuff gets canceled, whatever. You get to a new place, they don't have this, they don't have that. Where do I go to the cafe? Where do I buy groceries? And then boom, in a week you have to do this all over again. It's hard. And you can do this, and it works for some people. There's that high from kind of, if you keep moving. But, if you're moving every week for 2 months, I say, you'll begin to get tired. So it's great to land in one place. But again, everyone's different, so experiment and see what works for you. So managing finances or money across borders. So it's good to get a kind of card or some kind of, I use Revolut because it has great currency conversion, and you might have other options in your country depending where you're from, but Revolut is available in most countries now. There's others. I think Wise is pretty good also. And you always want to have some cash, and some ideally in US dollars. Like it happened to me when I got to Indonesia, for instance. My card just wasn't working for whatever reason. Or I think I didn't have internet, and then my bank was blocking it. So anything could happen. So it's good to have some cash, because then I just went and exchanged it to the local currency. So keeping some cash is good. Maybe not too much. Maybe don't carry more than $1,000, but have at least 200 or something, just in case something happens. Then taxes. Taxes is an important one. And even just traveling, I mean, technically you're not allowed to work in places if you go on a tourist visa. Some people still do that. I know that some countries are stricter than others. So, even if you're working online, technically that could still be considered work that you're doing in the country. So just something to be mindful of. Also taxes. Most countries have this rule that if you're staying there for more than 180 days, some countries it's less, some countries it's more, you become a tax resident and you need to pay taxes there for at least that year. So that's why now I stay less than 180 days in places, or whatever the amount is. I kept my residency for a long time in Belgium, and in retrospect I should have canceled it earlier, because I wasn't really using it for anything. I mean, I have my healthcare there, so I can always come back and do my visits. But I was doing less and less of that over time, and kind of relying less on Western medicine anyway, and can touch on that another time. So eventually I talked to a tax consultant, and he explained how in theory actually you can be without a residency, and if you're working online, you can create a company like an LLC in the US, or it can be in other countries, and you won't be taxed anywhere as a personal resident. The only thing is you cannot spend more than 180 days in one country. So that's an option. It's a little bit trickier because sometimes you need to provide proof of address for especially financial institutions, but that can work, and that's legal. But again, consult with a tax professional, legal professional, and just consider deregistering from your country. I know for the folks in the US it's a bit different. Doesn't matter if you leave the US, you still have to pay the taxes there. In Europe it's not like that, except for Hungary, I think. So yeah, just something to consider. Travel insurance, it's always good to have. I had some medical issues that happened to me, like in Sri Lanka, for instance. I had a surgery, and in the end my company, or the insurance company, returned everything. And mail handling is, again, we're getting a little bit practical here. Something to figure out, like where your mail is going. To be honest, I didn't do the greatest job. I had my old addresses in London, and I just left them, and they're not being forwarded anywhere. So if stuff is being sent to, it's just new tenants or new owners that are getting it, and so that's not ideal. But there's ways you can kind of pay a monthly fee to get your mail forwarded somewhere, and then you can eventually pick it up or get it scanned or stuff like that. So there are solutions for that. And technology and work setup. I have my laptop, I have my tripod, my camera. Some people travel with a stand. It's quite comfortable. That's probably one of the biggest downsides also of the nomadic life, is I miss a kind of good ergonomic setup. Like I'll just basically I just have to surrender to the chair or the table that's going to be there at the place. And if I'm staying longer, like here, we might get a desk, and it's a little bit different. But yeah, that's a kind of a downside. You don't always have your ideal ergonomic situation, but it's manageable again. So one big question that I get about the nomadic life is finding conscious communities, or community in general. And it's true that it's probably one of the biggest downsides or challenges of being nomadic. I mean, this is what I'm craving at the moment. I'm more introverted in nature. My business is online, and so I spend a lot of time on my computer, and I talk to people online, and now I live quite remotely. I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere with my partner, so I get to socialize with my partner, of course, but it's a little bit harder because it's not like you're in one place where you have friends from legacy, right? Like your childhood or your university. Instead, you're just making new friends, and that can take a while. And I think for women, it might be different than for men. It depends. I kind of feel that men struggle more to make friendships somehow. later on. I could be wrong. Of course, for women, it can also be difficult. But yeah, this is something that I've struggled with for sure. Like, traveling and kind of being in places and just feeling like lonely, or just feeling like I wish my friends were here, and then I kind of go out and maybe I'll meet some people, and it won't exactly be always the kind of people I want to be with, or it won't flow as much. I'll still get the kind of, that dose, I guess, of socializing or being around people. So this is definitely one big aspect. So one way to mitigate that is, I consider myself a conscious entrepreneur, however you want to call it. So I have my business online, and this is what I do for a living, and and it's also my gift to the world. But I also have a very strong spiritual side, and kind of or inner side, however you want to call it. And at this point, I don't go to clubs to get drunk, or do any kind of these things, and I prefer more conscious events. And some of you might be familiar, some not, but it might be something like ecstatic dance, for instance, where you go, there's no drugs, there's no alcohol, and people just dance. There's music. It's kind of like a meditative dance. There can be others like contact improvisation or acro yoga jams. So a little bit more like the kind of hippie events, but not necessarily. And so for me at this point, I like being in places where there's at least some of that happening. Because if I'm in a city where there's nothing or none of that, I mean, it might be okay, but it won't really feel right for me. But instead, if I'm in a community or in a place where there's a lot of these kind of conscious events, as they're called, then I'm more likely to meet like-minded or like-hearted people. And so that's been my kind of preference. So I actually found a blog post, and if I remember, I'll link it below, of someone else, it's not mine, and she listed all the main kind of conscious hubs of the world across continents. And it's great because you know which towns or cities or communities you might go to where you can find that same, not necessarily same, but kind of this aligned tribe of people that are, kind of just seeking beyond what's the norm or beyond what's kind of the usual. And that's great because generally those people, they're kind of more open to just being vulnerable and authentic straight away, and it's more this kind of authentic relating in many ways. And so you can connect with people a lot more easily and quickly. Whereas, if you're in the city, it might take years before somebody will even open up to you, by the time you've had like many rounds of drinks and parties with them. So, and that's been the beauty. And honestly, that's kind of the beauty of travel. Like, people are generally more open to just, they know they're in a place for a little bit, and so that there's almost like that temporary feeling turns into like, hey, we might as well have a great time together, and I'm willing to be open, I'm willing to be vulnerable, I'm willing to connect and kind of remove any barriers, and so you get to connect with people more deeply, more quickly, if that makes sense. You also part ways more quickly, of course, but there's that beauty. Some of the deepest conversations I had were just with people that I met a few minutes ago, and we spent like an hour or two together, and then we never saw each other again. And you don't have that as much happening when you're living in a big city somewhere. You can, but not as much. So let me just check if this is still recording. Yeah, we're still on. So there are a few things I wanted to mention. So maintaining long distance friendships also. I have a few friends that I talk to, and that's a little bit tricky. The older I'm growing, the more I'm realizing that I want to prioritize real world friendships, because talking via voice notes or on the phone, it's nice, but it's never going to replace the real life friendships. And so I want to make a bigger effort with just, seeing my friends that are in other countries, visiting them or having them visit or meeting up somewhere. And I notice that sometimes that's a clutch also. I might kind of go to voice notes or calls with my old friends rather than go out into the world and meet new friends. And again, the real friendships are here, right? Because we're human beings, we're social beings. And that even just that physical proximity, the hugs, it's important. So, for me, it's become a lot more intentional in terms of, okay, who are my friends here, or who do I resonate here, or where can I meet people? And some friendships kind of I had to let go of, or some people let go of them with me, and just because of this kind of long distance. And I'm respectful to that, but of course, that's not always great. But that's kind of the reality of life also. I think, I know some people that crave to travel the world, but because of their friends, they're staying in one place. And it's their choice, but I get a sense that they might be betraying themselves in a way. Or at least they could do the best of both worlds, kind of go travel for a few months and come back. But again, everyone has different preferences. And yeah, but then, at the same time, similar to the conscious communities, you have digital nomad hubs. Digital nomad hubs is a little bit different. I mean, depends what you're into, but it can be a little bit random. Like I remember being in Bulgaria, in Bansko, which is kind of a digital nomad hub in Europe, one of them. And you meet people, but then it's just people that are working online together, but they don't really have much that is connecting them, other than, okay, maybe they're living a kind of similar lifestyle, and something gets lost. Like we just go for beers and we talk about random shit. Whereas at least in the conscious communities, people are, maybe they have some kind of interest in philosophy, spirituality themselves, in their work. Maybe if I go to martial arts, there's at least like we share the love for the martial arts or whatever it is. So, you can still meet people, and of course you'll have similar interests, but sometimes it feels a little bit random. And but one thing that's important to do is to balance the social life and the solitude. And I feel if you're on the introverted side, you would probably benefit from making more of an effort to meet people. And if you're already super extroverted and you need to be or want to be around people all the time, maybe you actually need some solitude to go more inside. So knowing where you're at, and of course honoring your needs, but also inviting that polarity, right, the other extreme, is useful, because that's how you're going to grow. And then kind of lastly, on the social aspect of nomadic life, dating and romance while nomadic, it's, again, like if your partner doesn't want to travel and you're traveling, long distance can be a little bit tough. It can work for you, but I personally feel that, it's not super sustainable, or you need to see each other often enough. Everything is different, right? Don't take my word for it. It's contextual. But yeah, ideally, I feel nomadic life is for someone who is either single or they're in a relationship with someone who also wants to be nomadic together. And that's maybe even better. I mean, there's not better, but it's different. I'll touch on the difference between the two. And but dating and romance can be really beautiful. I mean, I remember staying in places, just for a few weeks and just having short romance for, a little bit. It's like a beautiful story. Like you meet together and you share this time, and it's kind of temporary. And of course, there's almost some kind of charm to it. Some kind of, romance is just the best word that comes. Something romantic about it, right? And I'm also, again, I'm in the conscious scene, and with that I've also explored the conscious sexuality, so neo-tantra, conscious relating, and also through that you learn that there's a lot of community in different places. Like in Costa Rica, for instance, I used to go to a few communities and attend their kind of conscious play nights, right? So where people get together, again, no drugs, no alcohol, but you get to connect romantically, socially, sensually, sexually, right? All with kind of open communication, if there's consent. So that's the beauty, again, of being in those places where it feels aligned, rather than going to, a place and just getting drunk in a club and trying to hook up with someone, like I used to do when I was 19 or 20 or so, and I never liked that anyway, and I just didn't know there was another way until I found it. And so you can use dating apps. I'm not against them. In a way, it's quick. But again, just meet people in real life. Like if you see someone, if you cross paths with someone, just talk to them. And again, people are kind of on average more open when they're traveling. That's again something that I've noticed, because people want to meet people. And so I was single, or kind of not in a long-term or serious relationship, for the first 2 years of my nomadic life. And then about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I met my current partner, and we've been traveling together since. We had some travels on our own here and there, but for a maximum of a month or two apart, and then we kind of got together, and we've been together for the last few months traveling. And both are great. And actually, I mean, I feel very fortunate because my partner is pretty much exactly like me in terms of where she wants to go, which places she wants to visit, when she wants to settle in a place. And we almost have this synchronicity. There might be some differences. We might have different preferences for lifestyles or where we want to go, but more or less it's quite aligned, and that's quite incredible. And she's Italian, or originally from Italy, but she's also been traveling the world in New Zealand. We went to Asia together, and we met on the Canary Islands of Spain. And traveling together is quite, I mean, this is something I really enjoy because I think as a single person, being nomadic can get a bit tiring. Maybe traveling with friends, that's something I haven't tried being nomadic with friends. But again, if that's something that works out for you, or you have friends that want to do the same thing, that can also be beautiful. But being with a partner has been great because we get to support each other, we're there for each other. We can live in a remote place, right? And kind of, I probably wouldn't live here in the middle of nowhere right now. It's not middle of nowhere, but you know, there's no house nearby. I mean, there's communities, there's events I can go to. I'd probably choose to live more in a city if I was single. But now that I'm with a partner, I'm more ready and willing to be in nature, in the countryside, because I still get that connection. And so, you know, it can be challenging sometimes too, like traveling together and stuff can come up. And I feel it's a beautiful way to grow together because we're mirrors to each other. We learn so much from each other. We kind of see where our weaknesses are, or where there are areas of life for us to work through. And yeah, but at the same time, I really feel that it's quite a beautiful thing. But again, you have to find someone who is very aligned with you in that sense. So yeah, there are a few more things I wanted to mention. So on the locations, I mean, favorite places that I liked, and I also mentioned a few places that I still yet want to visit. I really love India, to be honest. It's not for everyone. It can be intense. Infrastructure is not the best. It's a bit chaotic. Hygiene is not always the best. Food can be delicious but heavy. But what a great country. I mean, just, you know, there's life force beaming through it. You're there, and I don't know, there's like, you kind of fall in love with that chaos. And it's quite a special place in the world. And I really recommend to visit. So I went to Dharamshala in the north, and that's in the mountains. And we were there last year, kind of where the season was ending, and then shoulder season, and then off season. And it was pretty quiet. There weren't many people in the end. And it was beautiful. It was just really great. So I really, really highly recommend it. There's a lot of Tibetans there, Tibetan Buddhists. That's where a lot of the refugees are. The Dalai Lama lives there. And, you know, if you want to immerse yourself in kind of spiritual practices from yoga to Hinduism to Buddhism, it's all there. But India is massive, very big. Not all places are kind of popular with nomads or travelers. So you might go to some cities or towns or villages, and you won't see a Westerner for days. And then you might go to some, and there's, you know, a hippie cafe around every corner. We also went to Pondicherry in the south, and Auroville, which is kind of an old intentional community. Tiruvannamalai, it's also amazing. It's the birthplace of Ramana Maharshi. And so India is really in my heart, honestly. And I plan to go back there. And it's quite a special place. Went to Sri Lanka a couple of times. I mean, first time I liked it was a few years ago. Recently, not so much. Got really expensive. It feels quite touristy, and I don't know. It just doesn't have the same charm as India, at least for me personally. Nepal was beautiful also for hiking, especially if you're into mountains and hiking. It's great. But yeah, I mean, I would still choose India over it, to be honest. Bali, I went a few years ago, and I feel at this point doesn't draw me as much because it feels way too gentrified and probably more expensive and too populated. Maybe more in the off season I will go, maybe to places where they're a little bit quieter, but it wouldn't be my first destination. There might be other islands or parts of Indonesia that are kind of less under the radar. But yeah, Philippines I still haven't been to, but love to visit. Same with Thailand. Thailand also maybe became a little bit overly touristy, but I think North Thailand could be quite interesting to visit. Kind of hearing from friends that went recently. Chiang Mai, Pai, Chiang Dai, maybe a few other places in there. But yeah, there's so much more to explore yet in Asia. I still want to go to Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. They're a bit more expensive, but still in certain places can be cheaper than Europe, or it depends where you're from. And there's also Central Asia. So there's still many, many different parts there. Now, Latin America, I really enjoyed Mexico. And Mexico has a rich culture, history. I think, yeah, you might need to be careful where you go, but I went to places, I mean, Mexico City and Oaxaca. Oaxaca is known to be, on average, the safest region. So I was in Oaxaca City and then near Mazunte, and I really liked it. Mazunte has kind of the conscious scene going on, and Oaxaca has a great kind of crafty or artsy scene. And yeah, Mexico has a really great charm. I mean, it feels a bit like Europe, in a sense that there's more of a soul, more of history. Like when I was in Costa Rica, it's great, there's beautiful nature, but there's not that much culture, there's not much history. Like it was all kind of wiped out, I feel. Whereas in Mexico it was preserved. So you really feel this kind of, from really ancient traditions to more kind of the colonialist history, there's a lot more preserved. And I don't know, just feels richer in terms of the experience there. And Peru is also beautiful. I mean, I went there for plant medicine. I did ayahuasca and dieta. I did San Pedro in the Sacred Valley, and Sacred Valley is a really special place. I generally love the mountains the most, I feel. So I would highly recommend. But again, we're still planning to go to Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Guatemala, maybe a few other places. So, and then in Europe, generally Southern Europe is where it's at. Northern Europe is just nice in the summer or maybe for festivals, but then, you know, the rest of the year, like 8 or 9 months, is kind of just rainy or cold, and it can be okay, it can be nice to visit, but it's a little bit less friendly with nomading. I prefer sunshine at this point. So Southern Europe is the more obvious choice. You have Portugal, many nomads here, great place to be. This is where we're now. Portugal is unique compared to other Southern European countries in the way that the Portuguese speak better English on average, not all of them. Yeah, it's just a very easygoing country. Like, and actually the Portuguese are even more Nordic in some sense. They're more introverted than, you know, the Spanish or the Italians. So, you know, me coming from more Nordic cultures, somehow I resonate with that. But I still like the warmth of the southern country. And it's beautiful nature, but it got more expensive over time, especially rent. There's a shortage of housing, especially summer. There's just too many people. So something to kind of watch out for. And but Spain is also great. We're in Galicia in the north, which was okay, but maybe it's a bit too rainy there. Ibiza, Mallorca, beautiful islands, amazing. A little bit maybe too poshy and expensive. But again, if you go off season, beautiful nature. There's also conscious communities there. I mean, Ibiza used to be a hippie island. Now it's more of this kind of bougie hippie and obviously clubbing scene, but it's still a very special place. There's other parts of Spain like Andalusia I haven't explored much. I wouldn't go to Barcelona or Madrid anymore, or I would pick Madrid over Barcelona, just kind of avoiding the big cities and just too many tourists at this point. But the coast north of Barcelona, close to France, is really beautiful. But also kind of, you know, these places are getting expensive, so not always kind of nomad friendly. But I would recommend the Canary Islands. This is something that's less talked about. You have the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean of Spain, and the weather is great all year round, pretty much. Not too hot, not too cold. And yeah, and they're each island even has a different microclimate. So if you go in the north, it might snow. In the south, you have like sunshine all year, and it's arid. So it's pretty trippy actually, and I really enjoyed it. And it's a really special place. And there are nomads there too, especially on Gran Canaria or Las Palmas. You have a lot of digital nomads there. It's relatively affordable. It's a little bit cheaper than mainland, yeah. So, maybe I would even come back there. There's also other islands like Madeira of Portugal, which I still haven't been to. Also, Morocco is just south of Portugal. Would love to visit that. Italy is maybe less nomad friendly, but there are some nomads, and I think it's becoming increasingly more popular. But it's not that cheap. Again, if you go to less touristy places, it is a little bit. Greece, maybe islands more. Depends also where. I think Crete has the most kind of going on, maybe Lesbos. Turkey is becoming more popular. It's good climate, it's relatively affordable. People feel mixed about the political and the economic situation, but from what I hear, people visiting, it's generally safe and no trouble. Cyprus is more expensive. A good place to kind of settle and put tax residency there, but I hear it can be quite boring sometimes. And then you have the Balkans, or kind of Eastern Europe, which has a lot of potential, honestly. Bulgaria, I thought was really beautiful. You could go to Serbia, Montenegro, Albania. It's a different mentality. People can be a little bit more closed and conservative, but they can also be quite warm and friendly and welcoming, and it's a beautiful culture and definitely worth a visit. So yeah, these are the main places. And also, you can always research communities. There's kind of different websites, intentional communities, eco villages. There are different kinds. There are those that are kind of living together for sustainable living. There are those that kind of maybe have a more spiritual, religious connection. There are those that are just kind of more conscious in the way that they're living. There are those that are more focused on polyamory or kind of free love, whatever it is. And it's not always easy to visit them. You kind of go for workshops or events, but sometimes you can ride and stay there a longer time or volunteer. I usually just visit it as a guest, but you can go and stay there. So lastly, I'll touch on making money while traveling, which is actually a pretty big piece. I built my business in a way that supports me to be free geographically. That was probably the most important consideration for me, or one of the most. Time and location freedom. So I want to work in a way that I don't have to be glued to my laptop, all day, and at the same time I can be anywhere where I want to be, and also work on things that I actually find exciting and enjoyable. So it took me a while to figure this out, and just to give context, so after I left Bloomberg, which was in working in finance, working in sales, I basically, I just kept, I was just traveling and I wasn't really making any money, but I was investing. So I had stock investments and I had crypto, and my crypto was exploding. It was coinciding with the boom at the time. So after 5 months, I did a few expensive retreats, and I was in Costa Rica, which wasn't cheap, but because of crypto, suddenly, on paper at least, I had $40,000 more than I did, even though I was spending money. So I was like, okay, this is amazing. And of course, I kind of, went down the greedy path of, investing more and more into crypto and selling my stocks instead of crypto, and not taking profits, and then eventually crashed, and then that was painful. All right, so crypto helped me sometimes, and sometimes I didn't make the smart move of taking profit, which I highly recommend for people to do. It's not a very sustainable way, but some people have a more systematic way of earning with crypto, like trading, using algos. That can work. But that was one way. And then I really got into photography, or kind of came back to it as I was quitting. Photography was big for me, or as part of my creative reawakening and just coming back to my artistic self, which I feel like I lost since I was a kid or a teenager. And I experimented with making a living with it. So I was doing shoots in London or while traveling, And but what I was enjoying most is just kind of more poetic, more artistic photography, which was more abstract. So it was more selling prints. And there were people that were asking me to do portraits, for the website, or to do like pictures of retreats. And I did that here and there just to earn some money, but it wasn't really kind of filling me up. So instead I just focused on, okay, I'll just do my photography for the art's sake, put my prints online. If people want to buy, great. If not, that's fine. And I try to play a little bit this fine art photography game of going to galleries and pitching, but quickly I kind of, I don't know, got a little bit disillusioned by it. Nothing against it, but yeah, for me it felt like similar to even the corporate game somehow. Like, you have your CV, you go to places, and where did you work, who represented you, and it's again just another kind of status game. So I just kept art for my heart, and I still sell prints sometimes and people buy from me, but I decided not to put the financial pressure on it. So then I had an opportunity to join a startup as one of the co-founding members, and I led their product there and their design, and they were based in Berlin, but they were decentralized or distributed, so I could be anywhere. That's where I was, in Belgium and then in the Canary Islands, and so I had some money coming in from that. I had an equity stake, but it only lasted for a few months before we weren't able to raise the next round, because again, crypto crashed and there was kind of a general slowdown in venture capital funding. And then I experimented with some consulting here and there. I did some cold calling for a company. I did some content writing, like freelance writing. I did some more like sustainable finance consulting. I did some sales consulting. And it was more through connections, more through network. And until at some point it just hit me that, I was also exploring a lot of psychotherapy and coaching and facilitation, doing some workshops, working with people one-on-one. And I was enjoying that, but I could never really find my flow. Like, I'm not really a therapist, I'm not really a coach. I'm also bringing the business side, but I'm not just a consultant. And eventually I kind of started to merge it all, and it hit on me that, or dawned on me rather, that, for me to really build a business, I need to have a brand online on the back of it. And I had photography on Instagram. I had my kind of professional / consulting profile on LinkedIn. And but then I decided to really just make a brand about what I love to write about, my interests, and kind of bring all my interests on all the different lines of work that I was doing together. And I picked X as my main platform because I was enjoying writing. And I started to build my brand. This was, a year and a few months ago. And since then, my business just kept growing and growing and growing. I created a lot of clients from there, one-to-one, did group workshops, did a cohort, launched a community, and since then started to expand on other platforms, including YouTube, which is where we're now. And so and now sometimes I'm just writing thoughts or writing things that just are coming through me, just I resonate with, and people will reach out to me that want to work with me or that resonate with me. And this is really the power of having a brand. And I never wanted to be kind of an Instagram influencer where I'm just like, filming my face every day. Look at me with my smoothie bowl or whatever. So instead I chose a kind of, I guess, a deeper brand. I call it a transpersonal brand, where my brand is a vehicle of service. And I get to share wisdom and knowledge with people. That's why I like writing so much, or maybe long form video, because we really get to connect on a deeper level than kind of just a surface reel. So yeah, so if you're going to travel online, I really recommend to build a brand online, and you can always find ways to monetize it. It can be that you build websites for people. It can be that you do writing for them. It can be that you do consulting for them, or therapy, or coaching, or design, or whatever it is. And there's more and more opportunities. Also with AI. AI might be taking away some jobs, but it's also creating new jobs or new opportunities. So, and the brand is really kind of your backbone of just building that resonance. Because people want to work with people. It's not just about the offer, what you offer. But anyway, on that we can talk about another time. So all my clients, I pretty much work with them remotely. Sometimes I'll meet people I work with online, and time zones can be challenging sometimes. Like India was a bit trickier. I had morning calls with the US, or like late evening, and then Europe was more like late evening, afternoon. And but being in Portugal is actually great because a lot of my clients in the end are in America, Canada, the US, sometimes Latin America, and so in Europe I get to have the morning to myself, focused on writing, creating, and then I can do calls in the afternoon. So Europe is actually a pretty good place, I would say. And then at the same time, I also have European clients, so we have a great synchronicity there. Yeah, so you can build different income streams. Again, depends on your financial situation, but try to already experiment with making money online, even if you're in your old city, wherever you're living, and in your old job, because trust me, like the first dollar you make online is just the greatest sense of freedom. Because once you realize you can make $10, you can make $100. Once you make $100, you can make 1,000, and so on and so forth. It's just a matter of taking the right action, maybe creating content, putting out offers, finding the people, letting them find you. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing. There's downsides to the laptop lifestyle. Again, I'm missing doing things more in person. I can go to co-working places, can meet up with, I met some of my clients or people that I met online in person while traveling. It's been amazing. But yeah, in the end, can get tired of being on the laptop. So let me just check. This is still, we're still going. It's going to be a pretty long video. So yeah, I guess that's probably it. I can wrap it up. So I think, when I think about the future of nomadic living, I think technology is making it more and more possible. Like we have Starlink now also, which is the connection to the satellites and, high-speed internet. You can live with a van and have something like Starlink and just work from anywhere. And I think it has a lot of advantages. Again, you can be tax-free, not have to live in one place. The downsides are living, you kind of always, if you have a big budget, you're more free, you can choose the place, but it might still not be ideal for you. So it's always kind of, takes some time to find a place. Like this place, we spent a lot of time looking for places, visiting places, and eventually we took it for, a few months. And that's, finding the right living situation for yourself. Because suddenly if you're in a place where you don't like it, with an uncomfortable bed for a few months, not that you're stuck, you can always leave, you can always buy a mattress for that stay, but yeah, it's not always ideal. But technology is making it possible because you can work online, you can work remotely, you can have high-speed internet. More and more countries have better infrastructure, and there's more and more resources for how to live nomadically. And I think this is beautiful because people get to travel and go beyond their comfort zone and to experience life. And I hope it's more than just kind of flying to Thailand and sitting in a cafe that serves Western food on their laptop. Like even if they do that, they still get to explore the local culture, learn the language, or learn a local craft, or whatever it is. And at the same time, I think for me, it's becoming more of, I've really enjoyed living nomadically, but now more and more I want to settle in one place. And I really want to buy a place and buy land and want to live in nature, but also around enough community, around people, and really just build in one place. And then use it as a base to still go and travel the world. Because being completely nomadic, it can get tiring. You lose your roots a little bit. So I think there's a lot of potential in the online. So if you kind of leave your expensive city, wherever you may be living right now, and you go traveling, you can be in cheaper places while you figure out what is it that you want to do. And, you build your business. And, it takes some time. And then eventually, as your business is going and you've figured out your cash flow, your income, you can begin to think about settling somewhere. And you can settle in places where maybe buying land is not that expensive, right? Rather than being in New York or London or Los Angeles. So, I really believe in the opportunities that we have online, while of course balancing it with the offline, doing work in the offline, finding friendships in the offline. This I feel is becoming more and more important for me, and I feel for many other people. So yeah, our plan is, we're staying here for a little bit, and then we'll do a few short trips. I'm going to Norway, and then we're going to Italy for Christmas. And then next year, maybe we'll do a trip to Madeira, which is the Portuguese island in the Atlantic, maybe Morocco, maybe Greece, we'll see. And then we'll go more north for the summer. The plan is to go to Berlin, because now being in the middle of nowhere, we're missing the city. We don't want to live in the city all the time, but we want to get that kind of, that kick. And maybe go to Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, stay in some communities. And then eventually go to Latin America. So actually, Chiara, my partner, really wants to go. She's never been. And so we're thinking Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala, and and really go, slow madding, at least a couple of months in each place. And then we'll see. Maybe we go to Asia from there, still a few places to visit. Maybe we come back to Europe. The idea is to eventually come back here and buy land in Portugal, unless we find somewhere else we really like. But so far here is pretty good. And to kind of almost, I guess, end that nomadic chapter in about a year or two from now. But for now, we keep going slowly. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was quite a long one, but I'm sure you found the parts that resonated or that you needed or wanted to hear. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below. Again, you can follow me, subscribe to my videos here, or follow me on X or Threads or Instagram, where I'm also creating a bit. You can also subscribe to my newsletters, where I share more about, just my life behind the scenes of what it's like to build a business online consciously while traveling the world, and, the beauty and the challenges of that, and of course the practicalities. So thanks for watching.